I've been using this radius square carbide cutter as my main lathe tool for several months now. From what I've read, a lot of people prefer the traditional high-speed steel gouges and scrapers over these, especially those who do a lot of turning. For me though, since this is just a hobby, this tool has made turning very approachable, and I've been able to make some things that I'm very proud of. Since the cutter has a 4-inch radius, using it on the inside of large bowls hasn't been too much of a problem. For smaller bowls though, it's just not feasible. So I finally broke down and bought a round carbide tool. A lot of people make these themselves, and I can see why. It's practically just a length of bar stock with a hole tapped at the end to screw in the cutter. Not having the requisite tools to properly work with metal stock though, and not wanting to become accidentally enraptured by a new hobby, I opted to purchase an off-the-shelf version. But I didn't want to miss an opportunity for a new turning project, so I got one without a handle. I bought a blank of palm wood for the handle. This is a really interesting material, and I was curious how it would turn. It wasn't quite long enough though, and I wanted to add some interest to the handle, so I decided to laminate in this piece of red oak at an oblique angle. I cut the scrap 1x6 at the angle I calculated. Then I squared one end with a crosscut sled. The scrap wood is going to help me with two things. First, it will let me cut my palm blank at the angle I need, and then it will help me glue the oak to one side of the palm. Since I glued the 1x material in the center of the blank, this didn't go through the table saw very well, and this was actually kind of dangerous. If you try this at home, put the scrap wood flush to the bottom, or use a piece of scrap that's the same thickness as your turning blank. I came out unscathed, but I had to do some cleanup to the cut surfaces with sandpaper. I glued the oak to one side first. I could clamp this without it sliding around too much since the opposite side is parallel to the glue joint. The other side was a bit trickier, but with enough clamps I was able to get it to hold in place. I had to eyeball where to glue the second side on. I should have lined it up and marked it before I got started with the. I did not want to sacrifice any material in this blank. I was shooting for 16 inches and I think it's about an inch short of that. So I put it directly in the chuck instead of on a spur center. The only problem with doing it this way is when you turn it around to turn the side, you don't have a good center mark at the end. This is the first time I've ever made a tool handle. It's kind of a liberating project in a way because you don't have any obligations to do a good job. You have the freedom to try out some ideas or just get a little sloppy since you know it's just for you and it'll get beat up in the shop anyway. First I roughed out the blank. Then I turned a tin on the end to match my ferrule. This ferrule is a 1-inch copper pipe coupling. I cut it in half with a Dremel, which turned out to be a hack job, so I had to do some filing to clean up the edge. I marked out a few inflection points in the blank and got to shaping it into a handle. Nothing ambitious here. I'm going for the standard Louisville Slugger handle shape. Once I got close to the shape I liked, I went ahead and glued on the ferrule and finished up the end. My plan was to try and drill out the end here with vice grips and a drill bit. I've seen other people do this on YouTube, but I couldn't get the bit to center itself. Now the right way to do this is with a Jacobs chuck for the tailstock, but my tool budget is overdrawn and I was trying to take a shortcut, so I decided to skip the drilling for now and finish the handle first. I flipped the blank by gripping the ferrule in my chuck, and I patiently adjusted the grip until it was running about true. I cleaned up the very bottom with some 80 grit sandpaper. I sanded the whole handle up to 220. If you look closely, you'll see a lot of tear out. This palm wood has a really unique composition. It's essentially really hard and thick, splintery fibers within a matrix of soft, powdery wood. It's like turning MDF with 14 gauge copper wires running through it. It's just so easy to roll out one of those big fibers, which leaves a big hole. Luckily, I wasn't trying to get a beautiful finish on this one. I drilled out for the tool by hand. If you've never tried this, don't. The hole wasn't centered, nor did it go in parallel to the handle. Luckily, this tool is meant to be held at a single angle when used, so I won't need to be rotating it. I glued it in with 5-minute epoxy. I'm the only one who will know it's cockeyed, so I'm not too worried about it. I cleaned up the handle with mineral spirits, and I finished it with a coat of Danish oil. Despite all the problems I had, I think it's a nice looking handle. I don't think I'd ever try to turn palm wood again, except the end grain is very striking, so I might consider a segmented piece where each segment has the end grain oriented radially. For a first handle though, it will certainly do the job, and I'm looking forward to trying out my new tool. Let me know what you think.